Welcome to pop.0 with Brian Chaffin and John Keith.
Today is Thursday, June 1st. This is the first day of June. So anything happening in the month of June will now officially be happening in this actual month, 2017. And believe it or not, this is a podcast, a video podcast for the Mac Observer. I am Brian Chaffin, editor-in-chief for TMO.
And I'm John Key, and in awe of Brian's insight there about the month and time. That works awesomely. That's why you tune into a show like this, for such incredible insights.
Exactly.
So, Brian, we've been gone for a while. Hopefully my sneezes and coughs are a thing of the past. And I guess we might be gone for a little while after this, too. So we'll see, as some of us are going to be vacationing.
It's true.
So I think that we'll be on hiatus for another 2 weeks. So this gem is that little island in between of a show. And once again, we have 3 topics, and we're live. The topics today, Brian, are the cloud is a lie, the Touch Bar MacBook Pro is a disposable waste of our time and energy and an embarrassment, and our hopes and dreams and wishes for WWDC, Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference. I guess let's dive right into it, man. I guess I wrote both these first 2 articles. I'll start with the premise. Wrote a couple of articles for TMO. The first is that the cloud is a lie. And I kind of get the whole gist of the article in the title. But what I did was I got pissed off, which is not saying much with regard to me, but I have this coin card, which is a really cool credit card, and you can shove 8 other cards into it by scanning it in, and then you only have to carry 1 card around when you swipe and buy stuff with. It's really kind of cool. And it totally went dead, and it went dead because the server that because the company went out of business. But you were like, all right, so the company went out of business, but I still got this piece of hardware. It should, continue working. But they shut down the server, and the card phones home anytime you want to do an update, like change one of the credit cards on your coin card or whatnot. And you can't do it anymore. Not only that, when I tried to do that, it totally bonked the card out, so it was unusable afterwards. And it was pretty lame because I don't know if the company even lasted like a year or so before it went defunct. But that a piece of hardware dies just because it relies on a cloud server that it doesn't need to rely on was kind of lame, which got me, thinking about all these other services that people rely on and what happens when the providers die. Everyone thinks like it's all forever, but we know that's not true. And I went and did a little bit of research, and there were so many big and small cloud services that went dead, and people like really, were out. The Zune is the most famous of it, right? Because if you bought music from the Zune store, it was DRM, copy protected. And when their server went off, like in some sense, you have these physical files on your machine or on your Zune player, but then they go dead because there's no way for the servers are shut off by Microsoft, and the system can't call home, and so you can't play this music because the DRM is forever shut down because there's no authorization server to enable it. So even though you have that, it goes dead. But then there were so many other, different services where people lost data, or there's a lot of online backup services. People think, oh, well, that's great, and hopefully they're using it as a tertiary backup, meaning they have a local backup. Maybe they have a separate backup that they take a drive to their mom's house or something like that. And then hopefully the network backup was the third one. But a lot of these backup services just died, and some of them gave no notice, and the data closed down, and they weren't able to access it. But the scary thing is, a lot of times these services, when they shut down because they go bankrupt or whatnot, some third party buys this up and has access to all your data. And this third party might not be the most scrupulous of entities.
Nor are they even bound to whatever crappy user agreement you signed on to.
Right. And by the way, the user agreement basically told you, screw you, you have no rights. Because anytime you're, just as a general rule of law, anytime you're forced to sign something, you're about to be fucked. That's just generally it. Like, no time are you signing something you're saying, oh, and now I accept the $80 billion string free from, Santa Claus. It's always like, I'm liable for lots of horrible shit, and I will agree to be fucked in a million different ways. Sign me. That's usually why the signature is there. So, but you're right. Even beyond whatever clip wrap agreement you have there, that's all gone. And now whoever has the corpus of all your data can do gosh knows what with it. You hope that it's deleted or thrown away, but
it's not. That's one of the things they're buying.
Right. Exactly.
That's one of the things they're buying.
And think about that. If you have a backup of all your most intimate data of your whole world that you've saved, and now some unscrupulous company is just like picking through those through that all they like, that's fantastic. I mean, some of the bigger companies that shut down were like Norton and Dell. The good news is when they shut down their backup services, at least that company still is operating, so they're still bound by that. But others are just dead, and who knows who got that data, which is terrifying. Then there are other service providers that are like application service providers, like a document management system. Could you imagine if your company depended on this company that went out of business? Mizui Flime was one of them. And you had all your documents for your business on there, and this thing shuts down. And now the worst part of a lot of these kind of productivity service on the web, service on the cloud applications is a lot of them usually don't give you a way to easily export your data out in a usable format for anything else or at all. So now you've got that service that died and took all your data with you. Fantastic. I gave you an example of Coin, but another big one was owned by Nest, Revolve. It was their home hub, and that hardware just died. So think about all these people building their smart homes, buying Nests and whatnot, and all those devices rely on some server staying up. And now you're investing, maybe you're building a new home and totally doing this stuff. And all those cloud services die. And now you've got to gut a lot of this hardware and redo it and hope the thing that replaces it doesn't die. And there's one more category of cloud service that went down. And this is maybe the most painful in some ways. A lot of application developers, they can't afford to build their own cloud services, right? So they'll hire Amazon's cloud service and they use that as a backend. But and everyone thinks, well, Amazon will never go out of business. They'll never do that. But let me give you two companies that are huge that went out of that totally closed their backend services down and left all these app developers totally scrambling. Cisco's Intercloud, which was a competitor to Amazon's cloud, shut down, and everyone was just, had to go scramble and get new backends, and their apps or devices or whatever were scrapped. And a lot of those were not fixed, meaning if you had an app that you bought, that server died and that was it. And Facebook's parse services also went down. But think about, there's one other one which is really interesting, and it just shows.
Please, John, let's make it a 10-minute monologue.
Yes, let's. But it's important for this reason. It was a drone share and drone kit services backend for drones, because nothing makes you feel as comfortable that you buy a drone where the backend server dies and now you can't control it. That's fantastic. So it was this broad swath of things that just died. And things that you would expect or hope to happen did not happen. You didn't get your data back. You didn't have a way to recover. You couldn't ensure that your data was wiped, your sensitive data. And these are things that reasonable people, I think, would expect to happen and didn't happen. And I think it's a bad thing. I think it's bad that people kind of run to the cloud in a non-thinking way and rely on it. And that was the purpose of the article, kind of to wake people up and say, it's not as good a deal as you think going up there. So what do you think of that, Brian?
Well, it's true. In addition to all of the things that the business dangers that you're talking about, you're also talking about letting your personal data out of your control. And that is, it's a problem for me. It's a problem for a lot of people. I think it's a problem for anyone who is privacy minded at all. I mean, like, I think one of the biggest things that you've mentioned is the reality that when these companies sell this data, you're not even protected by the end user agreement that you signed on to. And to your point, that end user agreement probably didn't protect you for much, but now you're not protected at all in any way, shape, manner, or fashion. They can do whatever the hell they want with whatever the hell they have. And that is, it's scary. It's annoying that the idea of having a piece of hardware that doesn't work because the server isn't being maintained somewhere, it's just philosophically offensive. You mentioned Google not going out of business. The reality is that Google shuts down projects all the time.
Yep. Google Health, they shut down with all your health data on it. That makes you feel nice and warm and fuzzy, right?
Yeah, but at least they're keeping it and using it. So that's pretty cool.
Well, yeah, I'm pretty sure the end user agreement says that we will use this to more finely fuck you in ways you can't imagine.
And then there's the fact that a lot of cloud services just don't always work. It's a tough balance, isn't it, John? Because you've got the things that can be done when you are harnessing a massive facility full of computers could be really interesting. The kind of processing and data crunching that can be done with the cloud-based service is substantial. Orders of magnitude, it's not even comparable to what can be done with your own computer. So I mean, that seems laudable and desirable, but at the same time, it seems like a lot of companies use a cloud backend as a crutch. I don't know. We're at an interesting point at the very beginning of all this, and it is, I believe that you are correct. At this stage of the game, it's largely a lie.
So here's the interesting thing. So I agree with you there. I don't want to say that, never use the cloud or the cloud is always a bad thing. I just think that what people have been sold and told about the current state of the art with the cloud is a total fucking lie. Your data you're not securing your data. If anything, you're putting it at risk for exposure to people you would never want this exposed to. Because dude, there's no one more careful with your data than the receiver in a bankruptcy holding. They're going to just be like, awesome, really respecting your privacy and shit on this. I mean, it's a ludicrous concept when you're putting it out there. And here's the interesting thing. I think Silicon Valley couldn't be more hypocritical about the cloud, because it's a very much do as I say, not as I do world there. All the most tech savvy people I know in Silicon Valley don't use this shit. They wouldn't think of using this shit. They have their own data on their own private clouds. Like, they have something a little more fancy than a Synology server, but a Synology server would do the trick. And for most of the services here that we're talking about, it's kind of interesting that you could have a Synology server, which is probably too techy for most people. For grandma and grandpa, they're not going to be able to get it. But a company like Apple, when I hear like, oh, there's nothing more to do with the router, I'm like, why not make they've already got Time Machine, a hard drive in there. Why not make that more like a Synology box and make it just as brain dead simple to do your cloud services locally on your own hardware instead of on Apple? I love the on-off switch for Time Machine. They made backup brain dead simple that even grandma or grandpa can, turn on the Time Machine thing. Why not, if I wanted to, have an on-off switch like that, and all the stuff that Apple holds up about my iCloud data? Why not, if I turn the switch and I have an Apple Synology-ish box, it would just sync down to that machine, and that would be the master for all that, and Apple never holds any of my data. Totally doable tech-wise. And
yep, it is. I would love that, especially for, when Tim Cook talks so much about privacy. That sure would be a fantastic way to do it. And I mean, like a box that sits in your home that's designed for everybody in the family, everybody in the house, to handle all the backups, all the things that normally go to iCloud, managed by Apple. I like that, man.
And here's the crazy thing. Like, people that use Dashlane and LastPass have been totally sold this most ridiculous bill of goods. And this is why having a local cloud, by the way, is superior than sharing your data in a central store. Look, if some hacker or government wants to hack you, there is nothing you're going to do to protect yourself, right? I mean, they will, if you're the specific target of someone wanting to hack you, that hack will occur. So there's nothing you can do about it. So there's no point to worry about it, right? At the very least, if they really want to hack you, they'll club you over the head, demand your password at gunpoint, and you will give it up, right? So if someone's really hell bent on doing that, you can't solve for that case, nor is it a good use of time. And the reality is, who wants to hack you in particular, right? Or me in particular? We're nobodies. Hackers want to hack something that's got a lot of value. So they want to hack, hacking a particular individual is rare. Hacking a huge service, like hacking all of Yahoo and pulling out millions of passwords, that's an irresistible honeypot for hackers. And that's what they tend to look for. They tend to look for breaches into big services where there's a lot of users and a lot of things they can exploit versus you individually. And that's one of the reasons, you know, you get the elite that want to use personal cloud servers, because the odds of them individually being hacked through obscurity is a lot lower than them being part of a massive hack. But yet the entire service, LastPass, is the gold mine of all gold mines for hackers. It's got everybody's password for every service. They definitely are trying to hack that a lot more than they're trying to hack John Smith, public citizen.
Yep.
And the proof in that is LastPass has already been hacked. So these services, it's crazy to use LastPass. You should absolutely use 1Password. Is it like, you know, inherently more secure? I don't know if it is or isn't because of encryption and whatnot, but the odds of someone wanting to hack you individually and particularly is probably significantly lower than you being swept up as part of a hack of a cloud service that people do want to hack. So it's a weird thing like that. And that same kind of security through obscurity principle applies to a local cloud, where if people want to hack iCloud, that it's beyond a gold star on a hacker's, you know, resume that they cracked iCloud in some way. So people will be doing that. But you individually on your little particular machine, if they had to do that for thousands of people one at a time, it's too tedious, versus you've got millions of people in one cloud break. So there's so much value in doing that. And you look at Silicon Valley, and they personally do very differently from what they're marketing to you with regard to their cloud services. And I find that very telling. And I guess the only other thing about it is, you know, I find that the gateway drug for this, and I'm always offended by this, is that they get students hooked on Google Docs and services like that. If you go to some of the richest neighborhoods, they don't use Google Docs. They got machines, and the students own their own data versus pushing all your kids' data up in the cloud for it to be mined and exploited or hacked. At some point.
I know of it. I think OneDrive is actually getting a lot of traction in schools. I know that OneDrive is getting traction in schools. And I'll also note that OneDrive and Microsoft and Google are going to be at ISTE, a STEM conference, at the annual STEM conference. Microsoft and Google are all over that, and Apple's nowhere to be seen, just kind of as a sideline. But I know that OneDrive is getting a foothold in education.
And it's because people are cheap and they're trying to conflate, you know, vice with virtue on this stuff. But the bottom line is, someone wants to spend only $200 on a piece of shit Chromebook instead of spending $700 on a Mac. And don't get me wrong, I understand that's a significant difference for a lot of people that maybe just not be able to afford it. But for a lot of people, that's not the issue. They're just cheap, and they don't give a shit, and they don't think that, you know, in some way I'm selling my kid out to the cloud like this. And I find that, look, kids, the way that human beings are designed, we're designed to be brainwashed, right? Like if you're in one culture, people tell you this is normal, and on the other side of the earth, people tell you as a kid another thing is normal, and you grow up thinking that's normal, and then you may or may not vary from that a bit, but you tend to still be within the bounds of that culture. because you're a brainwashable entity. So when you start kids off on the cloud like this and just say this is perfectly normal and reasonable, you shouldn't even question this. Well, that's going to really control their thought process on this a bit, and they're not going to question it nearly as much. So I think it's a huge disservice to put kids on this and saving 3 pennies on that, and almost every school district, because they're always pressed for money, is
but you know, John,
very
okay, first of all,
foolish on this.
I agree with I completely agree with you on that, but there's this bigger conversation at the heart of that, which is the fact that the United States of America does not spend enough on freaking education. We underpay our teachers, we underfund our schools, and this bullshit that's going on right now with Betsy DeVos as the fucking goddamn secretary of fucking education. We need to spend more on this stuff, and that includes not buying the cheap crap like Google Chromebooks and Android devices. Urgh!
So we disagree about spend on education, because I think we've been proven to spend way more than everyone else in the universe, basically, per student on education, and yet our results are worse. But I do agree that there are places where, like this, an infrastructure like this, it makes sense to spend more. And then I wonder, like, it's hard for me to justify, like, most colleges are costing 50, 60 grand a year. And I'm like, where the fuck is that money going? I don't know. It should be going. I agree. Like, teachers should make good salaries and whatnot, but I don't know where the money's going. And it's a bigger, I agree that, I mean, there's a huge conversation to talk about education on there, but I think reasonable people can disagree on, well, in my opinion,
I'm sorry. I'm not hiding what you just said. Actually, you were correct. How the hell are we spending more?
We're spending orders of magnitude more per student, and yet we're underachieving by orders of magnitude.
And our teachers make dick.
In a lot of places, they do well, but let's just go with the premise that they deserve to be paid more than a lot of other people within the flow of education. But somewhere there's a trap in the payment of education where crazy money is just going to waste, and I don't know what that is, and I think reasonable people can disagree on that. But to your point, this infrastructure is silly not to. This is one of those things that I don't understand how it hasn't been solved. Like when we, the Paris Accords and Trump not joining the Paris Accords and whatnot today. And one of the things I always think about, like in lowering CO2, that I don't understand how this has not been solved is, if you don't know, there's like 16 ships, oil tankers, that produce as much CO2 pollution and horrible pollution or as all the cars on Earth. And like how the countries haven't gotten together and just said, let's either, one, fucking fix these 16 ships, or two, just knock these ships the fuck out and build new ones to replace them. Because even if that costs $50 billion, it's $50 billion well spent. Like there's low hanging fruit, you know what I mean? Kind of like for infrastructure and pollution. And I think for education here too, which is you can't have decent education without the basic rudiments in infrastructure. It's like having shitty roads, which we have now, and things of that nature. Having decent computer infrastructure. It doesn't have to be super fancy. Not everybody needs, a super, high-end MacBook Pro and whatnot. But to own your own data is remedial. It's beyond. It's like fucking water. Like people need clean water, and it's a fucking embarrassment on our country that we have places that don't have clean water. It's a fucking embarrassment. And the same thing that we can't afford to have infrastructure where our kids own their own data, their own creations are sent up and sold out from underneath them because of a click wrap agreement that Google made them click on. Thankfully, those things aren't enforceable if the kids clicked on them, but they're like, whatever. The point is that it's just remedial stuff that I think most reasonable people on either part of our very divided nation's political spectrum can agree to, and yet that shit don't happen, which always surprises me and shocks me. But part of it is just knowing that it exists, and I think a lot of people just take this cloud for granted, like it's reasonable and it's unquestioning, and that's one of the reasons I shit so much on it, because not enough people are shitting on it. I don't get why. And again, if you watch the people in the know, their behavior is very different from what they're selling to the rest of the population on their own data. So fuck those people.
We're actually
fuck the cloud.
We're 5th in the world for secondary education. For primary education, I think we may be higher.
The point is, we spend for the amount we spend, what we're getting is not as great, and it makes you wonder why. Anyway, I don't have anything else on that. It's hard to have too much of a conversation when you agree with me a lot. So there we are.
All right, move on.
All right. Okay, topic number 2. The Touch Bar MacBook Pro is a disposable embarrassment. Again, the title kind of says it all. So, you know, a lot of there's been a nice back and forth. I love the readers on Mac Observer and the comments, even the ones that tell me that I'm an idiot.
Wait, isn't that
in
all
that? Maybe, I don't know.
No, you've because a lot of people have been agreeing with you lately.
Yeah,
I know that just chaps your hide.
It's true. I love it when there's 100% hate towards me. That means I know that I'm right on a topic, and it'll be sweeter to taste their bitter tears later. But and one of the comments, which is good, is like, this is old news. Like, this thing came out forever, and I'm like, yeah, it is old news. But here's the problem. The only thing that people have kind of complained about on the MacBook Pro is that is or is not the Touch Bar a stupid thing. And people can disagree on that. And the 16 gig RAM limit, which is fucking mostly meaningless, because that limitation is forced on Apple because of the chipset limitation. Like, it doesn't matter if you had an expandable card or not. The chipset's not going to see more than fucking.
Wait. They could have used a different chip. They could have used a different chip that would have required more space for cooling.
Right, but that doesn't give you an excuse for the expandability question, like putting a SIM card in there so you could choose it.
I'm not going to accept that the RAM limitation is irrelevant because they chose the chipset because that fit the form factor that they wanted. That's a problem.
Well, that may be here or there, but I think realistically the 16 gig is not. And you know what? Fair point. But to me, the 16 gig on the scale of what the fuck is wrong with this, like the Touch Bar is way down here, the 16 gig is way down here, but what I'm going to talk about, which is the soldered in SSD storage situation with it, is way up here, because it turns the machine into a disposable device. Like the RAM, 16 gig is enough or not, but with an SSD in particular, and a fast SSD in particular, you can go many, many years before that becomes a real hurdle for productivity. It's always great to have more. Yeah, if we can have a billion, jillion gigabytes, that's great. And to some degree, Apple is limited by the trade-offs and chipsets that Intel forces on them. Apple doesn't get to do that because they don't make their own chipsets with their laptops. But the storage thing is something that's pretty immediate. The most you can get with the MacBook Pro is a 2 terabyte drive, which for some is infinity storage, but for others is like laughable. And the problem is that may be fine even today. For example, my buddy Walt, who did the whole headphone segment with us, he got the new one. He got it all maxed out, and the 2 terabytes is okay for now. But he's only got about 500 gig free. And at his current rate, that means in probably less than a year, it's done. And then what's his option? You know, people are like, oh, put like, you know, some kind of USB thing, or that's not realistic. Come on, it's a svelte laptop that is designed to be, you know, moved around, much less, you know, dongling like a SAN or some of the other ridiculous things. It was ridiculous for the Mac Pro, much less a svelte MacBook Pro, to have, you know, SANs hooked into this. And if you're a video producer, a creator, you need a lot of storage for your product, especially if you're doing any 4K work, which this laptop is touted as being good at. Anyway, what happens is he has to sell this laptop or get rid of it and get a whole new one with another soldered in thing. Whereas the laptop is perfectly great to otherwise last 3, 4, 5 years. And proof of that is I got a 2011 MacBook Pro that isn't too much slower than his maxed out one with regard to sheer video and processor grunt. But I have a 2 tera in there now. I could throw in a 4 terabyte SSD in there today, which is sad that I have more capacity today in a 2011 MacBook Pro than I can in the brand new shiny one. And it's just not realistic for pro users. Maybe someone can make an argument that we should have a MacBook executive or a MacBook, you know, edition.
I'm going to quibble with your wording. It's not, what was your verb? Acceptable?
Yeah, it's not
acceptable for some pro users. There is a subset of pro users for whom that is plenty.
But that's repeating the same mistake. It's saying, well, we've decided this subsegment of pro users, it's okay to have this Mac Pro that's totally contained. And that's been proven a disaster for Apple, where they've had to come in and embarrassingly apologize for being retards on it. I mean, how many times do they have to repeat the Mac Cube mistake with professionals to understand? And they did in their press release and their apology say, pro users are not this small segment. Pro users, it's a wide umbrella. There's a lot of different types of professionals. So this machine has to be adaptable to a wider array of professionals. And the fact that some subsegment is okay with it, it's what you accuse me of being. Well, seeing it from my perspective and nobody else's perspective.
But there's the thing is that there is a point at which Apple can't cater. I happen to agree with you that this is well below that point, right? Having it soldered on. Like I have a big problem with the MacBook Pro's entire approach. The form factor was chosen and limitations were therefore imposed. And a lot of those limitations are not conducive to professional use. The amount of RAM and the storage being the two biggest. The USB-C ports, whatever, get on with it. But
I agree.
This is so far below that bar of what Apple should be taking care of for a pro machine, just like with the Mac Pro.
Well, and the proof of that, and the proof of it is that the lower entry MacBook Pro without the touch bar does have a slot for a replaceable SSD. So whatever tiny difference in thickness or battery capacity that would have cost to rearrange to have that same slot in the touch bar is laughable. I don't want to hear the excuse. Go fuck yourself. I don't want to hear the rationality. It's just stupid argument.
Yeah, it needs to happen. And if that means the goddamn thing's got to be a little tiny fucking bit bigger with a bigger battery, and that's fine, because you need the functionality. Pro users need the functionality. That's
so yeah, and again, so everyone that's arguing for this is arguing on something that Apple already confessed that they fucked up on and were failures at with regard to the Mac Pro, of making the segment of pro users just here and not the brighter spots. So I don't understand the apologist nature of it, other than I guess will always be apologists for it, and people that say, well, it's good for me, so fuck everyone else. But I just don't see the reason for the SSD thing in particular is painful. And here's the question to you. The rumor is that there's going to be an update on the Kaby Lake. I'm thrilled for the updates, no matter how frequently they come. It's great. Although sadly, I think Intel just announced the replacement for Kaby Lake coming out in the second quarter. So even when Apple releases this, it's probably
coming out in the second quarter. It's coming out in June.
Yeah, it's coming out in July or ish. I believe the Kaby Lake. I maybe I got that wrong, but they definitely announced the replacement. I forget what the name of it is. I can't remember all these stupid fucking code names they come up with. But it's coming out, and I think it's going to be available relatively soon. So even the update is still going to be like a gen behind. Like they can't get there.
Well, unless I mean, Apple, I believe, is in the inner circle there at Intel. So
it would be a great surprise if
that what they're going to announce is actually going to be with that new processor.
That would be a fucking, you know what? Oh, that will make my day. So,
I actually suspect that is the case. When I saw that Intel announced that, I figured, oh, okay, this is probably what Apple's going to announce.
You know what else I hope? I don't know if you've seen all the AMD processor announcements, but they're phenomenal. In some ways, AMD has they've gotten back in the game. They're very, even at the top end, I think their processor is 16 core, and Intel's top processor is 18 core for their Xeons. But what's cool about where AMD absolutely ass rapes the Intel chips are the PCI lanes, which many people think, oh, it's irrelevant, but the number of lanes you get dictate the number of independent, for example, Thunderbolt 3 ports that you have, and USB 3 ports and things like that, as well as video channels. If you have video cards for Mac Pro, they have 64 in their processor, and the Intel's top one is only 44 lanes, and that's just a lot more bandwidth that those machines are capable of. So I hope that AMD ass rapes Intel, because they've been so uncompetitive.
Arv is telling me the new Intel chips are actually coming out at the end of 2017, so 6 months from now. And Threadripper from AMD is coming out in July.
Right. Those are the okay. So the new Intel chips for the laptops. No, he's thinking about the desktops. He's thinking about the 18 core one, and he's right about that. But there's a replacement for the Kaby Lake laptop, kind of the laptop range. And I believe, I don't remember the name of it, unfortunately, but I believe that's coming out, at least they said summerish, which is soonish.
Gotcha.
I think it was around.
All right.
July.
So the rumor is that the MacBooks will have the Kaby Lake processor.
Right. So meaning they'll be a gen behind, but whatever. The fact that they're just updating shit is already like,
listen, updating that 10 months after it was released, it's like 2007 all over again in a good way.
Well, let's hope it's the beginning of that. But here's the question for you. Do you think that they will have learned enough that they will fix the SSD not being soldered in for this? Because frankly, if they do, I'm getting one. If they don't, fuck them. I'm sticking with my 2011 machine.
Golly, that's such a good question. It depends on if there was, it depends on if okay. Let's go back to the meeting that Apple had with 5 journalists where they gave the mea culpa over the Mac Pro. And they said, please, we get it. We're going to fix it. That meeting.
Were they serious is the question, right?
Well, and also the process behind that meeting was there was probably an enormous amount of executive bandwidth spent on discussing that and deciding their strategy before that meeting took place. And who won that fight? Did the designers win that fight, or did the engineers win that fight? And if the engineers won that fight, maybe Apple will have learned its lesson about soldering the SSD into the MacBook Pro. But if this was not a situation where the engineers won the fight, I would imagine that we're going to see some things that are business as usual.
So, this brings up an interesting thing. I forget where I read this article. Maybe you saw it too. Somebody was saying like it's time for Johnny Ive to go because he hasn't produced in a long time. And I think there was a podcast and some transcript from, I forget what site now. And
I saw you mention it. I didn't see it myself.
Yeah, I don't think they've got their facts totally straight, but maybe I don't have my facts straight. But this is my understanding. Is for one, Johnny Ive was not the designer of the trash can Mac. It was someone else that was ultimately fired. I forget. It was one of the designers that was fired not long before or after the meeting of the 5 journalists and the mea culpa on the Mac Pro. So that design, and I believe that designer also may have been responsible for the Touch Bar Mac Pro. So kind of 2 not awesome hits for Apple. Back to back from that designer, so you kind of understand why he goes. But I think Johnny Ive has, after the watch, has just been on sabbatical because the dude is exhausted. He looked exhausted, and I think he deserves a break. So he hasn't been around for a lot of this stuff that people are blaming kind of this boring and lack of production on Apple. And I don't think it's his fault. Like, it's not his fault that when he leaves, everyone else is so freaking incapable or makes bad decisions on what to do. So I don't know that he deserves the blame. Maybe he's also out of creative juice, but whatever. He doesn't deserve the blame for some of these things. I think his
time and attention has been spent on the building. I think that he thinks of that. I think that they all think of that as their tribute to Steve Jobs, rightly or wrongly. And I think that's where his time and attention has been.
And even if that's the case, again, he doesn't deserve, the Mac. That makes although, I mean, I guess in some sense you say, well, the buck stops here. But if he's been mostly on sabbatical and or tinkering with architecture and tree displays,
door handles, I know the door handles were pissing you off.
Right. So, but he's entitled to his sabbatical however he wants to spend it. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't hold him responsible for other shitty designs when other designers basically ran with that, and other shitty
he hasn't been
decisions
on
by
an
Apple.
actual sabbatical.
Yeah, but the stock would have gone through the floor if they said he was, leaving for 3 years on sabbatical or shit like that. There's no way they're just going to publicize that.
They'd have to. They'd be sued for breach of fiduciary responsibility.
Yeah, but you could listen. You can run this in a way where you kind of get to roam around, dude. That we're telling you that's your responsibility as this new head of bullshit, right? And your responsibilities are to peek in wherever and however you want, and that's your title, right? And then you're complying with whatever stuff it is because it's a new made up title that they gave them, which is true. It's a new made up title they gave them, so they can arrange a lot of this stuff the way they want and get away with it. I mean, in theory, right? The health issues of Steve Jobs should have been reported too, but there are ways around this in the corporate kind of minefields that they try.
I'm surprised Apple wasn't sued for not disclosing that.
Yeah, well, it's a gray zone, right? And people can take advantage of a gray zone.
If Apple had tanked, there would have been
different. Would have been different. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Anyway, so I hope that, to me, this is a test of how genuine are they, right? Because to change the soldered in thing to when they already have a slot for the lower end MacBook Pro, it takes them nothing to do. It's not a tweak like, oh my God, we got to re-engineer this whole thing. They could totally add that in time for this update. And if they have that in, to me, that's a positive sign that they're taking this Pro ship more seriously. Not to mention, it's my own. I really want to get a new laptop because mine's a 2011. It's nice, but I'd love to get it something a little more modern, if I can. But the storage thing for me is a huge issue. I'm not going to pay $5,000 for something that I need to replace again in a year because I can't upgrade the stupid storage on it. It's mind-boggling. I don't understand how you can call that a Pro machine and not have upgradable, at least, storage. Anyway, I think we've beaten that dead horse unless you got something else on it.
No, I agree. Apple needs to not be soldering things like that into Pro machines. There's that balance, man. There's that balance between what pros need and form. And there, I love that Apple pushes form, but I don't like seeing pushed. I don't like forms being pushed too much
over
function.
Yeah, it's got to follow. I mean, especially for pros. I think I wonder what your thoughts are on this. I think Apple's had this problem because they have they have the vestiges of this grid that Steve Jobs came up with, the consumer versus professional, right? And the mobile versus desktop machines. And they keep coming up with funky things like the MacBook Air that kind of fits somewhere. It doesn't fit in either. And I think they need to grow up and just say, we have a third category and call it the edition or the executive or the elite, right? Where it's not for...
But they'd be hammered for that.
Oh, I don't think so. I think a lot of people would like an edition version of
the edition,
a MacBook.
All right, okay.
So
no, I take that back.
And this edition, I think this MacBook Pro with the Touch Bar that they're calling that would make an excellent edition thing where it's all about how much can you pack into a super sleek thing. And then the pros still need the pro shit, right? And I think they would sell. I think they could expand their line and it would stand up to it. And, this stupid watch is evidence, at least a little bit of feedback to that point. So I think there's a market for it because the executive market likes to show off bullshit, but the pros really need to do a lot of work. And there's overlap in that Venn diagram for sure, but you still have to cater to the bulk of at least the pro market because I think they're so essential. I think if Apple continues to bleed those, they've lost more than the less than 1% of sales that they represent. They've lost the heart of the opinion makers, and that can kill this company years from now. It's a delayed reaction for sure. They're selling at the height of things, but once all those opinion makers go and start pushing other things can snowball downward really fast, and we've definitely seen that in the past in Apple's history. It's not like it's not alien to Apple. It's happened to Apple when when you know, they're almost bankruptcy in '96. So it's not theoretical.
Yep.
Anyway, yeah, New York saying hello to everybody. All right. Topic 3 is our hopes and dreams for WWDC, and you wrote a little article about it. So why don't you start off with what you hope or dream or fear, and I'll come in with mine.
Well, the big thing that set me off today was that Apple released 2 developer-oriented press releases today. Right? Apple announced that it's paid out more than $70 billion to developers through the App Store, which is just crazy. And Apple also announced that Swift Playgrounds would support third-party devices. So in particular, robots, drones, and Lego Mindstorm. And wait, drones, robots, and musical instruments too. So if they're Bluetooth enabled, you'll be able to control them via commands that you put together in Swift Playgrounds. And if we look back, how much money Apple has paid out to developers has always been a keynote bullet point. And Swift Playgrounds itself was announced during WWDC. So if we're seeing 2 developer-oriented announcements happening the Thursday before Monday's keynote, that keynote's going to be packed full of crap. It's just going to be packed full of crap. There's no way that Apple would push these 2 particular announcements off to press release status if Apple had room for them in the keynote. There's just no way. I mean, this isn't even filler. This is red meat. How much money Apple has paid out to developers? Red meat. And what I wrote in my article was that if the amount of money that Apple has paid is red meat, well, then cool toys being able to be controlled by playgrounds, that's a bowl full of ice cream and cake. And you know, developers, again, they just gobble that stuff up. It'd be great. It'd be, you know, rah, 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 we're doing this thing. It's really cool. Developers would be stoked. Who doesn't love Lego Mindstorm, right? Who doesn't love drones? Who doesn't love this stuff? So anyway, I think this means we're gonna have an action-packed, chock-full keynote on Monday.
So I disagree with some of what you said in that I don't think, like, it's like when they showed the Takami car, or I don't know if I'm saying the right company name, the cars that, you know, robot little cars that went around. Like, I didn't give a flying fuck about that during the keynote presentation, and I don't give a fuck about.
Lots of people do.
Well, lots of people do, but it's not. Look back on history. It's not like when we talk about that keynote, we're like, oh, and the cars, that was such a huge announcement.
The third party
announcements,
products, announcements, never the things that we remember, man. That's a straw man.
Well, no, I disagree. I think people remember the iPhone announcement because the iPhone, and people remember.
That's not the point. The third-party developers show stuff on Apple's keynote stages, show stuff on stage during Apple's keynotes to help bolster the point. They're not the point of the keynote. They're just and the WWDC keynote is in part to get developers riled up and revved up. And right now, developers need revving up, right? 3 products in the last 9 months. People are not excited about Apple right now. So Apple needs to get folks excited. I think announcing $70 billion in developer payouts would have been a thing that would be exciting. I think that developers would have had a great time with this Swift Playgrounds announcement. And not only that, the Swift Playgrounds announcement is not specifically about Lego Mindstorm. It's about what Swift Playgrounds can do. And this is something that speaks directly to developers.
So I disagree. Those are not the interesting parts of the WWDC, and it's not what gets them all the marketing extraneous stuff that.
Well, fortunately, I didn't argue that, so that's good. And
it's totally not an interesting part of any of the WWDCs. It's filler in my opinion, and I disagree with you on that. The other thing is, I bet you they still mention the $70 billion number.
Yeah, I wonder why announce that today if they're going to even mention it.
That is interesting why they announced it today, but you may be right. So we'll see. It may be because it's overstuffed, and I think that's a very plausible and rational construct there. We disagree about the excitement level about the Mindstorm things, whether it was in there or not. I just see it as filler and useless, but reasonable people can, I guess, disagree. Here, let me ask you a question. How many products do they need to announce for you to feel good and excited that they've turned a leaf and are now producing a lot more versus kind of this gap of 9 months of them not producing anything, and basically the last 4 years of their production being shit?
I respect that question a lot. I don't necessarily believe that you can put them, you can base this metric ahead of time on the number of products. It's going to be the products themselves that are announced. It's going to be the message that goes along with them. There's a lot of things that could go into that keynote that would make me believe that maybe Apple has finally got it and turned the corner. And at the same time, if Apple just released a slew of things that were just wrong and they said it wrong, that's not going to necessarily convince me. So the number of products isn't my focus. I know it is for you, but it's not for me.
Well, says the person that's keeping track of how many products they've released in the last 9 months. So let's go down the line of what is kind of expected from the rumor mill, right? We expect at least a 10-inch, 10.5-inch iPad Pro. Maybe they'll refresh the 12-inch and the other one as well. Who knows? But at least that. The most obvious is we expect a new version of iOS and macOS will be announced. And the rumor is that there's going to be a replacement laptop, right, for the MacBook Pro. There's some consensus, or at least around that world. And then there's the perhaps a little bit more suspect, but also in the rumor mill, Siri speaker, kind of Alexa Echo competitor for Amazon that might be announced. Let's start with all that without the Siri speaker. If they just announced the laptop, the iPad Pro, and the 2 versions of the operating system, are you going to feel good about the WWDC, or meh, or kind of disappointed?
A new MacBook Pro is going to have me excited, period, because it's been 10 months. A new MacBook, it's about damn time, right? I mean, so there's, there better be a new MacBook since we hear there's going to be MacBooks. I hope there's a MacBook Pro. That would be so exciting. Mac OS and iOS new, yeah, whatever, of course. So that's so expected. That's not going to really affect me. A new iPad that blows me away would be great. I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting that Apple didn't have a spring event, and they didn't have a spring event, and now they're going to be announcing hardware products at WWDC. That's a head scratcher to be polite about it. So I don't know. I tell you what would have me excited: a new MacBook Pro and Siri speaker, and a new MacBook and a new iPad. So I guess apparently my magic number is 4 right now.
So if they announce just the MacBooks, the iPad, and the iOS, and I think you made an excellent point. Like if they have some kind of new brain reading technology in the iOS or whatever, right? Like there could be a feature that's so awesome in there that it would melt my brain. But assuming it's just another iteration of the same old progression. And it's just the iPad, the OSs, and the MacBooks. I'm going to be hugely disappointed. And my view is they are continuing to not produce worth a damn. If they add in the Siri speaker, I'm going to be very meh. Maybe it's okay. Maybe it's the start. It takes a little while, maybe to then ramp up. If they add one more thing in there, right? Beyond that, for example, there's rumors going around that there's going to be a new Apple Watch that has, and don't think that the irony is not lost on me with the following statement, with wrist straps, but with wrist straps that actually have function, right? Like sensors or an additional battery, and they're extensible.
Yeah,
like maybe
I don't think those are coming at this event.
Glucose monitoring or something, but something to. I'm giving that as a for instance, but whatever. One other thing beyond.
Wait, hold on. I got to defend you a little bit, because you're talking about a wrist strap that is an electronic computing device that is different that is different from just a wrist strap. I'm not saying I buy into all your criticism of wrist straps. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that you're not being inconsistent.
Well, thank you for that. But like I said, the irony isn't lost on me when I start talking about how awesome it would be to get cool wrist straps, particularly ones that, you know, actually do something that are extensible and whatnot. But whatever it is, that if there was one other thing that came out of it, especially something we didn't expect like that, I would go from meh to, oh, I'm excited. I think they're kind of back. They're starting this ramp up of production, and it would get me excited. So we're not far off. It sounds like we're more or less like a product apart on where we would start to get.
You're giving the MacBook Pro just a given.
I'm not only is it a given, it's one of these, like, you know,
the MacBook is the only thing that's given, according to Gurman. It's the MacBook Pro that may come, and I hope it does come.
So I'm taking it as a given. I may be wrong, but that's my expectation. I could easily be wrong on that. That's going to be updated, but because otherwise, then they're waiting another cycle for that? I don't know, maybe, but whatever. I'm taking that as a given, and I'm taking that as a meh. That's what you're supposed to do. I don't have Stockholm syndrome on this, where like, oh, thank you, you're updating your machines regularly again. You're supposed to do that. So it's not terribly exciting to me. So, you know, and I think there was, you know, Gruber was so sycophantic about this. He's like, Apple, except for the iPhone rumors, has been really good about keeping secrets. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, the iPad Pro is 10.5 inches has been talked about for forever.
Secret. The only thing that Apple keeps
the Alexa
is the Mac Pro, and software.
Right.
Nothing else. So Apple keeps nothing else secret.
So I don't even know where the hell he's coming from. It's like, oh, they've been so good at keeping a secret. I'm like, every detail of this, you know, I hope he's wrong. Maybe he's totally right. And we were like, everything we thought was going to come out didn't, but these 80 other awesome things came out, in which case kudos to him. But the Alexa type thing has been talked about. The 10.5-inch iPad Pro has been talked about. The details of the MacBook Pro update have been talked about. Kaby Lake, the details of the MacBook have been talked about. And iOS 11 and the 13 of macOS has also been talked about. So the rumors about all that stuff I don't know where, maybe he hasn't been paying attention or doesn't care, which is another thing. But to say that, oh, they've been doing a good job of keeping a secret, I don't know where he's coming from on that. I just
listen. There's too many fingers and eyes on every product. The only products that Apple can keep a secret are the ones that are being made internally. If it's being made somewhere else, it's going to leak. It's just going to leak. From now on, it's going to leak. When you've got sometimes millions of fingers and hundreds of thousands of eyeballs working on a product in the ramp up before it's announced, it's going to leak. And that's not even counting the people that are making the components that go into it.
You're preaching from my old article that Apple can't keep a secret, and I don't understand why they keep up the pretense. I mean, I'm not even sure what the point of that is. If you know that that's the new reality, then why not give people something to expect? And in some sense, they kind of did that with the Mac Pro, which is kind of crazy surprising, because it's the one product they can keep secret, but they can't because they fucked up so much that they have to, you know, beg people not to go away, because so many pros were going away to Windows and Linux and other platforms or Hackintoshes, that they were starting to be worried, and as well they should be, because I'm not sure what the bleed is. It's tough to know. You know, was it 5% of the pros that bled, 50% of the pros that bled? Like, if I had a gauge from at least the Mac Pro forum, which is not in any way, I can't say is representative, you know, system wide, but I'd say there's a decent chance that there's about 25% bleed of pros because they've been waiting just so long.
Oh, we don't know, but it's certainly possible.
We don't know, and I don't want to, like, that's my best. If you put a gun to my head and say make your best guess, that's what I would guess. But I could be wildly wrong. It might be 1% for all I know, or they might have increased for all I know. Anyway, it's yeah. For me, it would take to see that they're kind of back in the saddle of production. And I guess this gets me to the one question that I really want to have is with you. I want you to admit that Tim Cook is a dirty, filthy liar about his deep pipeline. And let me give you the reason why I think he's a dirty, filthy liar. 4 years ago, he said, we have a great pipeline. And that would, to any reasonable person, I think most reasonable people, when they say, what's coming out, oh, we got a great pipeline, you would think that means, oh, about a year, year and a half, maximum 2 years from now, something from that pipeline is going to come out that we're going to be pleased with. And we're going to say, wow, that was a great pipeline. Look how look, they went through a year that was kind of empty, but now 2 years later, they came out with like 35,000 products or whatever it was, and everyone's pleased. But as of 4 years ago, at least, when he was saying there's a great pipeline and the dearth of production in the last 4 years, how do you not look at it and say he has misrepresented what he was saying at least 4 years ago?
Because you are interpreting what he's saying and then holding him responsible for your interpretation. If Tim Cook's point is that they're working on important disruptive products that haven't yet been released, then what he said was true. And I don't even give a crap about this. I mean, listen, I've got a problem with Tim's lack of iteration, with Apple's lack of iteration, right? We've talked about this. We are almost perfectly in agreement with this. Apple's inability to release new Macs is mind-bogglingly inconceivable. I can't even understand it. Apple's failure to iterate on iPads, the same thing, right? We are in agreement with that, but it's very obvious that Apple has incredibly important products that are being developed for the future. That is,
I think that's a disingenuous interpretation of what the word pipeline means. The pipeline doesn't mean here are the 80,000 different things we have in R&D, some of which would never may come to pass. That's not in the pipeline. That's a pipe dream. A pipeline means we have products. Funny. We have products that we're planning to release at some point that are in the development that we are planning to put out. So at the very least, I think that is the most reasonable interpretation of that phrase, and that's what most reasonable people would interpret it to be. And at the very least, he was either misrepresenting things or catastrophe happened and stuff that they thought was going to be released blew up or whatever, and they weren't able to do it. But the fact that he consistently kept doing that for years upon years, to me, in my mind, speaks of a disingenuous representation of what was they were going to be releasing. The pipeline isn't about everything in R&D. You know how many things they work on in R&D? In that case, you could say we have infinity things in the pipeline. But that's not what people are talking about when they talk about the pipeline, in my opinion.
I'm okay with you being pissy about this. I'm not pissy about the future. I'm pissy about. You don't see the contradiction
in your terms. You don't see the contradiction.
No, I don't.
That you're saying, well, I agree. They haven't been releasing any products whatsoever. But the fact that he was talking about a great pipeline seems legitimate.
Yeah. Depends on how he's defining it.
Yeah, and my point is, what would a reasonable person define? Not the argument. What would a reasonable person define?
Who cares? Oh my God, who cares?
I do.
If Apple, you care because you are.
I think. Are you kidding me? Do you know how many
person?
You're
like me.
No, you're Mr. Pedantic, and you're the one that says that I sit around reading the tea leaves of Tim Cook's statements because they're so prolific. And by the way, hundreds and hundreds of analysts and all of Wall Street listens to that dude's words. To say that nobody cares is totally disingenuous. Everybody cares what that guy says.
But I don't care about this particular point that you're honing in on. I don't care.
It's a huge misrepresentation by the CEO.
Apple.
It's a huge misrepresentation by the CEO. If that's true.
According to your interpretation, this is correct.
Well, to say you don't care about it is to say, like, well, I don't care if there's a misrepresentation.
I disagree with your interpretation, and I don't care about the argument.
So you think that a reasonable interpretation of the word pipeline is anything that they may be wondering? Like a guy in the bathroom scratching his nuts is like, I think we can make things, transport.
I don't care. The important thing is Apple's not iterating, and Apple has
you don't care because
big stuff in the labs.
You don't care because you're not being honest with yourself. You're not being Wozniak honest with yourself. You're not.
The important things are that Apple is working on big products. And the important thing is that Apple needs to correct, says me. And the important thing is that Apple is not releasing enough new Macs, and I want that fixed.
I love the particular shade of red that your face has turned. That makes me very pleased in life, by the way. And I disagree with you. I think a lot of people can reasonably rely on his words and have an expectation. And I don't think he lived up to them. And I think more people need to hold him to that standard. Even if you disagree and you think that a fair interpretation is the other way, I think you have to allow that a large number of people, particularly investors, may have taken the interpretation I'm saying, and it is not an unreasonable one. And that he may have misrepresented things, either willfully or by accident, is something he should not continue to do.
He hasn't done it in a while. He hasn't said anything about the pipeline.
Well, maybe he's finally learned, and maybe that's telling you of something else. And I like your interpretation. Maybe that's telling that he's finally got something coming, and I hope that's the case. But the fact that he stopped saying it, I hope, is also because, like, it's pretty ludicrously provably wrong if you take my interpretation of what the pipeline is. And I think that's the more reasonable one. I'll take that as an admission of guilt. All right. Do you have any other topics or bile that you want to spew my way? Or are you all biled out for the day?
You know, I don't know. We're going to have the keynote. It's going to be in a couple days. I'm really a lot more interested about the things that get said along with whatever is announced. You know, what is the message that Apple's going to be? The thing I want to see most from this keynote is that, yeah, we get it. We're going to be putting out some new products. They're never going to say it that way, right?
I understand what you're saying. I mean, it'll be a very Kremlin-like wink, not unlike, I guess, that press conference. So I'm kind of jazzed that you're jazzed. And that's one of the reasons I love being around you, because you're a way more positive human being, although that's a relative than I am. But that is admittedly a very low bar. Yes, it's true. It's true. I'd like to try to pretend otherwise, but that would be gross.
This IK Multimedia iClip Grip Pro. It's much more positive person than you are.
Oh, so sadly true. What went wrong in my life? Who beat me? What puppies were kicked? You know? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, people. Anyway, but you know what's sadder? I know, despite but you're joking on your other show, which is a great show, of me always being wrong. You've been on record as agreeing with me on a number of things, so you know what that means.
I didn't say you're always wrong. I said you're wrong all the time. There's a difference.
Right. Well, the point is that when you're agreeing with me, you know what I'm saying.
I often agree with you. You were also correct a lot. And the real point of that particular story was slightly different. Whatever. We're talking about AC.
I took it as loving ribbing. Maybe it wasn't meant that way, but that's the way I wanted it to take it.
It was totally meant that way.
Yeah, you know, it depresses me when I'm right about like these depressing things. I like to be wrong on them, and I've certainly been wrong in the past, and I will continue to be wrong in the future. So I don't want to pretend otherwise. Anyway, so I'm trying to hook on and latch on to your optimism there, and I'm hoping you're exactly right that the show's so overstuffed with awesomeness that they had to pre-announce.
Oh man, here's what I fear. I fear that I'm a drowning man and I see a flash of orange and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, it's a life vest floating in the water. I'm going to swim to the life vest. It's going to save my life. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to get to it. And it's going to be a big gulp cup. It's going to be a broken, empty, big gulp cup that's bobbing in the water. And, you know, and it's trying to get to that ocean of plastic, that the island of plastic that's in the middle of the Pacific. and you know, and it's batting me away saying, no, I got to get to the island of plastic. And it leads me to drown. That's what I fear.
Well, at the very least, if it's a lot of big gulp cups, maybe.
That's true. Yeah, I guess that's possible. It's enough of them.
Maybe that'll save us. All right. Well, I got nothing more.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We very, very much appreciate it. And thanks for the facts coming behind the scenes, Arv. We much appreciate that.
Yes, thank you, Arv. And on that popular topic, we'll see you probably 2 or 3 weeks from now, depending upon our vacation schedules. Take care, everyone. Bye.